The wind moved slow that evening, like a tired animal dragging its belly across the dry earth. Dust whispered through the porch slats of the trading post, catching in the sun like tiny ghosts. The air smelled of old pine and cracked leather, and the world sat still enough to hear one's own blood shift. Taza Redbird stepped off his horse without a word. His buckskin boots landed soft in the dirt. He tied the reins with a practiced loop, eyes sweeping the yard without turning his head. He carried no rifle today. Just a small bundle slung across his back, pipes, beadwork, 3 carved figures he'd shaped from cottonwood root. He hadn't spoken to another soul in 4 days. Inside, the trading post was dim, lit by the golden edge of afternoon light sneaking through the warped windows. Rows of grain sacks and tobacco tins lined the walls. The floor creaked like it remembered every step ever taken. And then he saw them. 2 little girls sat near the sacks of salt and coffee beans, pressed shoulder to shoulder, like stones the river had refused to part. One was humming a strange tune, off-key and steady. The other simply stared at the floorboards with a jaw set too tight for someone that young. Their dresses were too small. Buttons strained over their round bellies. Their cheeks were red from windburn, their hands chapped and raw. Both barefoot. Both silent. Taza blinked. Not because he doubted what he saw, but because the sight pulled something from him he hadn't felt in a long time, ache that didn't know where to land. The shopkeeper, a white man with a red nose and stiff posture, noticed Taza's glance. "Stepmama dumped them here this morning," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Claimed they weren't hers. Said their real mama died last winter and she was done bein' a mule." Taza's eyes narrowed. "Left 'em with nothin' but a bag of cornmeal and 2 crack spoons." The man spat in a can. "Figured we'd send 'em to the Reverend's orphan lot. But the Reverend's full up. And these 2 ain't what folks call adoptable, you know." Taza crouched low, letting his knees settle easy into the floor. The humming girl kept going, like it was all she had. The other didn't move. Her eyes met his. Brown. Darker than prairie mud after rain. She looked at him like she was waiting to be sold again. "What are their names?" he asked, voice rough from disuse. The shopkeeper shrugged. "Older one's Clara May, I think. Quiet one. The other's Ruby Lou, talked to herself all morning." Taza didn't ask more. He didn't need to. A man like him had been looked at like that. Branded in silence. Judged by shape, skin, or stillness. These girls had learned already what some grown men never did, that love was not always louder than absence. He turned to the counter and traded his carvings for dried beans, salt, and a can of peaches. Then, without asking, he ladled a tin cup of water from the barrel, walked over, and handed it to the smaller girl, Ruby. She took it like it might vanish. Her hands trembled. Water spilled down her chin, soaking into her dress. Clara didn't blink. Just shifted slightly so her body leaned toward her sister's, steadying her without touching. "You hungry?" Taza asked. Neither spoke. He unwrapped a strip of cornbread from his pouch and placed it between them. Ruby grabbed it. Clara didn't move. The shopkeeper chuckled behind the counter. "Ain't no use, Redbird. They ain't your problem. You best leave things be. Else folks'll start thinking you collect orphans like charms." Taza stood. "I'll take them," he said. The shopkeeper blinked. "What?" "I'll take them. They come with me." "You can't, you ain't even." He looked around, as if someone would back him up. But the room was empty but for the ghost of judgment. "You got papers?" the man tried. "Sheriff Dunlee'll want a word." Taza picked Ruby up in one arm. She startled but didn't resist. Clara stood on her own, lifting her chin as if daring the world to stop her. Taza took his blanket from his bundle and wrapped it around both girls. "I don't need permission to rescue the abandoned," he said quietly. The door creaked open behind them as they stepped into the failing light. A few townsfolk stood near the well, watching. One woman whispered to another. A man narrowed his eyes. A voice rose from the side. "He's taking them home?" That's not right. He ain't even their color. They ain't gonna fit nowhere. Taza ignored them. He lifted Clara gently onto his back. She was heavier than she looked, but he did not flinch. Ruby pressed her face into his neck. Her breath came in little hiccups, like she was trying not to cry and failing. The sky turned bronze, then blood orange. Wind curled up from the hills. He did not ride. Instead, Taza led his horse by hand, carrying both girls like burdens he had chosen gladly. One on each shoulder. Their small weight a kind of anchor. The dirt road stretched ahead, long and lonesome. Behind them, the town doors closed one by one. By the time they reached the edge of the cotton brush, Ruby had fallen asleep. Clara whispered, "You don't have to keep us." "I already have," he said. "You ain't scared?" Taza paused. "Of them?" "No." "Of what they've been through?" "Yes." She didn't answer after that. Just rested her cheek against his shoulder. The stars blinked on, slow and deliberate. When he reached the ridge above his home, he looked down at the little adobe hut. Empty. Still. The wind had blown one shutter loose again. But for the first time in years, he saw something more than silence waiting inside. He stepped forward, the blanket around the girl shifting with each stride, like wings tucked tight. The last line of light touched their feet as the door opened ahead. And in that moment, even the desert air paused, because something small and sacred had just been salvaged, and the land knew to hold its breath. The door creaked as Taza nudged it open with his boot, and dust rose like memory from the floorboards. His home was a large one-room with thick adobe walls, a cast-iron stove in the corner, and woven mats scattered where his wife once said rugs made the place feel too proud. It smelled of juniper ash and cedar smoke, old things that knew how to wait. He sat Clara down first. She didn't stumble, didn't speak. Her eyes swept the room in a silence scanned walls, windows, exits, as if she were already bracing for the next leaving. Ruby sagged against his chest, limp from sleep. He laid her on a blanket near the fire pit and tucked another over her slowly, like he was wrapping something cracked but not broken. 3 tin cups sat on the shelf near the basin. One hadn't been touched in 2 years. His wife's cup. The one with the chipped rim she liked to run her thumb along when thinking. Taza stood before them and stared. Then, without speaking, he filled all 3 with warm water from the kettle and set them in a row. When Ruby stirred, he was already at the hearth, slicing dried apples and grinding cornmeal. He didn't rush. Children didn't need fast hands, they needed steady ones. The girls watched, still as rabbits in a new clearing. When the food was ready, he placed bowls before them, thick with hominy and fire-warmed peaches. Ruby reached first, spoon clumsy in her grip. Clara took longer. Her eyes flicked between him and her sister before she lifted a spoon with quiet precision. They ate with a kind of quiet desperation, like joy might be hidden under each bite if they were quick enough. Taza didn't speak. Just sat across from them with his own bowl, eating slow, each motion echoing peace. By nightfall, Ruby was asleep again, curled with her doll, a limp-stuffed shape made from old curtain cloth and no face left on it. Clara stood at the door, watching the moon rise. "They said we're too fat to be loved," she whispered without turning. Taza rose and joined her, kneeling beside her as the moonlight slid across the dust outside. He spoke with care. "That's not true. They said it's our fault Mama died. 'Cause we take too much food. Make too much noise. They said that's why the stepmama hates us." The wind answered first, brushing its long fingers against the eaves. Then Taza said, "People say things when their hearts are smaller than their mouths." She looked at him. Her eyes weren't wet. They were burning. "Am I ugly?" He shook his head. "You are strong. That's different." She didn't speak again, just leaned her forehead against the doorframe and closed her eyes like she could hold off the world by shutting herself away. That night, Taza sat on the porch after the girls were asleep, his wife's blanket across his shoulders, pipe unlit in hand. He remembered the night he'd buried her. The earth had been so dry he'd had to break it with a pickaxe first. She hadn't cried in childbirth. Just faded. Like a song slipping past its final verse. She would have liked the girls. The next morning brought work. Taza began his rhythm. Feed the chickens. Fetch water. Muck the goat stall. Clara followed at a distance. Ruby stayed inside, humming again as she traced the weave of the mat with her fingers. Taza said nothing. He just made extra space wherever he went. By the third day, Clara asked if she could help with the eggs. Her hands were careful, but her breath was too quick. He showed her how to comb the hens with a whistle. She tried and failed, then laughed once, short and sudden, like a hiccup of joy she didn't mean to release. Later that afternoon, Ruby brought him a stick she'd found with a bend in it like a hook for a pirate. He carved it into a spoon. Gave it back. She carried it around like a charm. Townsfolk began to talk. Miss Thorne passed by with her prayer shawl tied around her shoulders and said, "You feeding them sweets too? Lord help them, they'll never fit a corset." Another man leaned on the rail outside the blacksmith's and muttered, "Redbirds raising livestock now." Taza said nothing. But the next day, he let the girls mix honey into their oats. And when Ruby asked if she could braid his hair, he sat on the porch and let her. The braids were uneven. Lumpy. But she stood back after with a wide smile, and he nodded solemnly like she'd crowned him. That night, Clara asked him what Apache meant. "It means the people." "Are we the people too?" "You are now." She seemed to consider that, turning it over in her mind like a smooth stone. Over the next week, a quiet transformation began, not dramatic, not sudden, but soft as moss pushing up through a cracked log. Ruby learned to tie knots. Clara learned how to sharpen a blade with a flat stone. They made tea from mint growing behind the house. They soaked beans overnight together. Each small act stitched them tighter into the fabric of the place. Then came the day the Reverend's assistant arrived with a buggy and a clipboard. "You're not family," the man said flatly. "They need structure. Church care. You got no papers, no formal guardianship. No blood tie." Taza stood between the man and the door. Said nothing. The man stepped forward. "This ain't proper." Ruby clutched Clara's hand. Clara said, "He gave us water." Taza didn't raise his voice. Didn't reach for a weapon. He just said one line, "The world threw them out." "I did not." The man shifted, uncertain now. "You can tell the Reverend," Taza added, "that the only thing formal about this house is kindness." He left. Muttering. But left all the same. That night, the fire burned low, and Ruby fell asleep humming again. Clara stayed up, rubbing oil into a leather strap just like Taza had taught her. "We're not scared of you," she said, almost proudly. "I know," he said. "We don't need no real pa." He nodded. "But, it's nice to have one," she added softly. He did not answer. But later, when they were both asleep, he washed the third cup and placed it on the table again. The wind outside had settled. The land had grown quiet. And inside the house, 3 cups waited to be filled in the morning. Not as placeholders. Not as memory. But as proof that sometimes, the world gave back what it stole if only you were quiet enough to hear it coming home. The town square buzzed with the low hum of gossip and the clink of enamel teacups as the Sunday sun cast its hard light across the wooden benches and whitewashed church steps. Women in bonnets and stiff collars fanned themselves in the heat, needlework balanced in their laps like armor. Laughter rippled beneath the canopy of the cottonwood tree, but it never reached the ground. It floated sharp and curved like a hook. Taza stood at the edge of it all, still as the shadows under the general store's awning. Clara and Ruby walked beside him, their dresses clean and hemmed, each stitched by hand. Ruby's sash was uneven, tied in a big lopsided bow that she had insisted on doing herself. Clara's braids were tight, her shoes polished with leftover oil. Neither of them looked up. Their hands were clenched together so tight that the knuckles bloomed white. The moment they stepped onto the green, conversation faltered. Miss Beatrice Thorne turned her head too slowly, her mouth already pursed like a lemon rind. She wore a hat with lilac ribbons that looked like it hadn't been touched by wind or work. Her eyes locked on the girl's figures, round, full, unapologetic. Her lip curled. "Well," she said into the hush, "ain't they dressed like Easter eggs?" Someone chuckled behind a hand. Taza said nothing. He stepped forward, a hand on each girl's back, guiding them not away but toward the women seated in the shade. He was not a man who demanded a place, but he claimed one anyway, simply by not yielding. Clara's chin lifted. She looked straight at Miss Thorne. "Are you here to join the sewing circle?" the woman asked with mock sweetness. "Or to bring back the extra pie pans?" Another chuckle. This one sharper. Ruby blinked. Her bottom lip trembled. Her fingers slipped from Clara's. Miss Thorne reached out with a lace-gloved hand, as if to pat Ruby's head. There, little dumpling. Don't cry. It's only the truth. Sometimes the truth is what helps girls grow into proper women." The slap was not loud. But it stopped the wind. Clara's hand was still raised in the air when the circle fell into silence. Her face was blank, not angry, not ashamed. Just steady. Like a pond that refused to ripple. Taza didn't move. Ruby's breath caught. Her eyes darted to her sister, then to the women. No one spoke. Beatrice's face went red, not from pain but from being touched. Touched by someone she thought beneath her. "Why, you little," she began. "They don't get to talk to us like that," Clara said, voice low but firm. "We ain't dumplings. We're people." Ruby nodded beside her. "And we don't want to be proper if it means bein' like you." Gasps fluttered like wings across the circle. Miss Thorne stepped back as if the girls had thrown fire instead of words. Taza looked to the girls, then to the women. "They will stay where they can be seen," he said, each word weighted like a stone set in place. "Shame does not belong to them." He led the girls past the sewing circle and sat with them on the edge of the platform steps. The sun glinted off the church's white paint. Birds called high from the eaves. No one spoke to them, but no one made them leave either. Later that afternoon, the girls helped hand out lemonade with a young boy from the Reverend's home. Clara held the pitcher like it was sacred. Ruby offered smiles like apologies, tentative and real. Taza sat nearby, whittling a branch into a small horse. His hands moved slow. Patient. The kind of patience that came from burying more than he'd ever built. A younger woman, one of the baker's nieces, passed by and paused. "They yours?" she asked softly. "They chose to stay," he said. The woman looked at the girls. "They're brave." He shook his head. "They are tired of being left." By sundown, the sewing circle had packed up. Beatrice Thorne left without another word, her pride trailing behind her like a torn hem. Back at the house, Ruby sat in Taza's lap and asked, "Are we gonna get in trouble?" "For what?" he said. "For not lettin' folks tell us what to be." He shook his head. "You didn't do wrong." Clara lay on the floor beside the fire, staring at the ceiling. "I didn't want to hit her," she whispered. "But she reached out like we were pets. Like we were ugly things." Taza looked into the fire. "Sometimes people speak from their own hunger. It don't mean you have to starve." The girls didn't fully understand. But they nodded, as if they would one day. That night, after the girls were asleep, Taza walked out to the edge of his field. The moon had risen. The air smelled of clay and turned earth. He sat on a stump and ran his fingers through the carved wooden horse in his palm. It had a crooked leg. The grain had cracked where he hadn't seen the weakness. He didn't fix it. He left it flawed. In the distance, he could hear Ruby's humming again, rising faint and soft through the night like a song stitched from old grief and small hope. The town would keep whispering. But the girls were learning to speak back, not with shouting, but with presence. With standing. With not folding themselves smaller just to fit someone else's fear. And in the quiet of the field, with only moonlight and crickets bearing witness, Taza smiled. Not wide. Not proud. Just enough to mean it. The heat broke in late summer, but the tension didn't. By the time August laid its hand across the valley, the air was dry enough to whisper warnings through the corn. Every stalk stood brittle, gold and tall, stretching toward a sky that hadn't cried in weeks. The girls had taken to singing while they helped Taza husk off-key melodies about honey jars and red shoes, things they'd never owned but dreamed aloud. Taza worked alongside them in silence. He'd never been a man of many words, but lately, even fewer made it out. The way Clara wiped her forehead with her sleeve, the way Ruby squinted into the sun with that stubborn squint she wore like armor, he carried those things inside him now. Small anchors in a world too quick to unmoor. He had just finished sharpening the hatchet when Clara came running, barefoot, breathless, face white as flour. "There's smoke," she said. "Out past the third row." He didn't ask which way. He dropped the blade and ran. By the time they reached the edge of the field, the fire had caught. Flames licked upward, wild and greedy, already dancing through the rows with a hunger that spoke of more than wind. Fire didn't start like that on its own. Ruby was crying behind him. Clara was grabbing buckets. Taza moved without thought, hauling water from the well, dousing what edges he could reach. But the fire didn't care. It snapped and leapt, fed by months of dryness and someone's quiet hatred. Neighbors arrived. A few. Not many. One man brought a shovel. Another, a wool blanket to beat down the flames. No one asked who started it. No one had to. By the time the blaze was out, half the corn was ash. Taza stood in the smoking ruin, chest heaving, hands blistered. The smell was sharp, sweet and bitter and wrong. Like a harvest that had been choked in its sleep. The sheriff came late, of course. Sheriff Dunley had the posture of someone who'd forgotten how to stand for anything. He kicked at the blackened ground with the toe of his boot and said, "Unfortunate accident." Clara, cheeks smudged with soot, stepped forward. "It wasn't an accident." Dunley didn't meet her eyes. "No evidence, child." "You got any proof?" She looked at the ashes. At the torn cloth caught on the fence post nearby. A familiar pattern. Beatrice Thorne's shawl had a piece just like it. Clara said nothing. Taza stepped between them. "You'll do nothing," he said. Dunley shrugged. "Can't go chasing ghosts." "Then maybe ghosts are all this town deserves," Clara muttered. That night, the house smelled of wet cloth and smoke. Ruby coughed in her sleep, curled into Taza's side like a kitten too tired to tremble. Clara lay on her back, eyes wide open, the ceiling shifting with shadows from the fire still burning in her memory. Taza sang. Softly. Old words in a tongue the girls didn't know. His wife's lullaby. He hadn't sung it since the day the earth took her. But tonight, it returned. Low and broken, like the melody itself remembered grief. In the quiet, Clara whispered, she wouldn't have liked this town. No, he said. But she would have liked you. The next day, Ruby's cough deepened. Her eyes were glassy. The fever rose slow but sure, a creeping flame of its own. Taza ground herbs and soaked cloths in cool water. He told Clara to fetch the neighbor woman, Mrs. Abley, who kept goats in secrets but had once saved a child from fever with only onions and prayer. Mrs. Abley came, carrying a jug of milk and a basket of mullein. She said nothing about the fire. Nothing about the girls. Just sat beside Ruby and laid a cool palm on her brow. She's strong, she said. But strength still needs help. Taza watched her, not trusting kindness that had waited this long. But when Ruby whispered, "It hurts less when she touches," he said nothing more. Clara refused to leave her sister's side. She spooned broth into her mouth, wiped her forehead, sang old hymns she barely remembered. "I'll trade places with her," she told Taza once, voice raw. He shook his head. "You already did. When you stayed." The days passed slow. Fever sweated through the walls. Ruby's breathing came in little whistles, and her hum vanished. Silence replaced it, thick and heavy. Taza sat each night by the fire, carving a new doll. One with hair like river reeds and arms wide open. He didn't know why. Maybe for Ruby. Maybe for himself. On the fourth night, Clara stood and made tea without asking. She measured leaves like an old woman, steeped it exactly right. She gave the first cup to her sister. The second to Mrs. Abley. Then she poured the third and handed it to Taza. He took it. "We're his miracle too," she said, not smiling, not needing to. Taza looked at her, really looked. At the smudge of ash still behind her ear. At the steady way she stood now, taller than her years. She'd grown. Not out of a child's skin, but into her own fire. He nodded. "Yes. You are." Mrs. Abley stayed the night. She didn't explain why. But the next morning, she left behind a folded quilt and a tin of salve. No sermon. No apology. Just something left in place of judgment. The corn was gone, but something else had taken root. Ruby's fever broke at dawn. She opened her eyes, saw Clara asleep on the floor, and whispered, "Did we win?" Taza touched her forehead. "You're here, aren't you?" She smiled. Barely. But it was real. Outside, the first rain in months began to fall. Not hard. Just enough to wet the earth and whisper promises through the soil. Taza stepped onto the porch, watching the ground drink. The ash would fade. Seeds could be saved. And the girls, his girls, had fire in them that no one could steal. He didn't speak aloud. But inside, something old and tired laid down its weight. And something else stood up in its place. Morning came golden and slow, the kind of morning that felt earned. After weeks of fever, smoke, and whispered threats, the sun rose gentle across the valley. Dew clung to what was left of the cornfield, each blade of green a soft defiance. Taza stood by the window, sharpening his knife not for use but out of habit. The smell of bread baking drifted in from the hearth, and from outside came the sound of ribboned laughter. Clara was combing Ruby's hair. They sat on the porch steps, dresses cleaned and mended, faces scrubbed, full from breakfast. A tin box sat between them, one they had dug out from beneath the quilt chest. It held scraps of colored ribbons saved from trades, old garments, even a strip from Taza's late wife's shawl. Clara held up the red one. Ruby chose the yellow. Their fingers moved clumsily, but with care. Today was the town spring gathering. A fair. Games and pie contests. Quilt raffles and a cakewalk. Even Miss Beatrice Thorne's famous lemonade stand. Taza had considered not going. But the girls, his girls, had different ideas. Ruby bounced on her toes when he stepped outside. "We tied them ourselves," she said, pointing to the ribbons now bright in their braids. "Red means strong. Yellow means bright." "And you?" he asked Clara. She smirked. "Both." Taza nodded. "Seems right." They walked into town together. Not on the edge of the road this time, but right down the center. The townsfolk watched. Some eyes narrowed, some softened. No one said much. But silence, when not cruel, can be a kind of surrender. At the green, music played from a fiddler bow, and the air buzzed with the scent of fried apples and fresh sawdust. Clara took Ruby's hand, and they walked up to the games booth. Taza stayed back, carving a small wolf out of hickory. His hands never rested now. Not because they were restless, but because they had someone to serve. Miss Beatrice Thorne sat under her lace tent, surrounded by ladies and gossip like always. Her lemonade stand, draped in pink frills, looked as proud as she did. She caught sight of the girls and raised an eyebrow. Well, she said, voice too sweet. "Didn't know we were letting barn girls enter town contests." Clara turned, the wind catching her ribbon like a flag. "We didn't ask," she said. Miss Thorne's smile twisted. "Still fat, I see." Ruby froze. Clara stepped between them. "Still bitter, I see." Gasps again, but not like before. This time, a few chuckles followed. One young woman nearby, Sarah Knox, the baker's niece let out a little laugh and quickly hid it behind her hand. Beatrice glared. Such disrespect. It's not disrespect, came a voice behind her. Mrs. Abley stepped forward, arms crossed, eyes hard. It's a mirror. And you don't like what you see. The circle shifted. The pedestal wobbled. Taza moved forward then, not quickly, but deliberately. He placed a carved hawk, freshly whittled, on the table in front of Miss Thorne. For your stand, he said. May it remember how to fly. She didn't answer. But she didn't speak again that day. Ruby and Clara went to the pie contest, not to compete, just to taste. They sat on a bench, cheeks sticky with berry and joy. A boy their age wandered over, Jack, the smith's son. He held out a dandelion to Ruby. Your ribbon's nice, he said. Ruby took the flower, eyes wide. You're not scared of fat girls? He blinked. Why would I be? You're just, you. Her smile cracked wide, teeth and all. Near sundown, the mayor climbed atop the platform to announce a special recognition. The crowd hushed. Today, he said, we honor courage not with noise, but with stillness. Not with medals, but with the acts that go unseen, caring for others, standing your ground, and becoming the kind of neighbor we hope our children remember. He held up a small wooden plaque. This goes to Taza Redbird. For quiet strength. And for showing us what real family looks like. Taza didn't move at first. The crowd parted for him as he walked to the platform, the girls at his sides. He didn't take the plaque. He simply nodded and turned, lifting both girls, one in each arm, as if they were light as breath. The crowd didn't cheer. But they stood. And sometimes, silence is the loudest kind of respect. That night, as stars thickened above them, the three walked home under a sky that no longer seemed so far away. Ruby leaned into him. You didn't save us, she said sleepily. You grew us. Taza looked ahead, voice quiet. No. You watered my grave. They walked in silence, the kind of silence that warms rather than wounds. Inside the house, 3 cups waited on the table. The fire crackled low. And on the windowsill, the ribbons, now untied, lay together like roots growing into one another. The past had not been erased. But it had been rewritten, thread by thread, in kindness and ashen laughter. And the town would never be the same. Not because it changed. But because someone dared to stay unchanged in the face of it. Someone dared to love loudly, without noise. Someone made ribbons out of ruin. And tied them with hands that had once only known how to let go.